Based in British Columbia, Canada, Dr. Shelley Moore is a highly sought after inclusive education researcher, teacher, consultant, and storyteller. She has worked with school districts and community organizations around the world. Her research explores how to support teachers to design for all learners in grade level academic classrooms that include students with intellectual disabilities using strength based and responsive approaches. Shelley completed her undergraduate degree in special education at the University of Alberta, her master's at Simon Fraser University, and her PhD at the University of British Columbia. Thank you for joining us today on Leading Voices in Education, Shelley. We've been looking forward to having you on our show.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, Shelley, you are such a wonderful educator, storyteller, and advocate. Can you tell us about your journey as an educator and how you became passionate about inclusion? Were there particular students whose experiences inspired you to take action, or?
Oh, that's a good question. So I would say what first inspired me to think about inclusion was probably as a student myself. But at the time, I didn't know what inclusion was. I called it leave me alone. That's what I called inclusion because I was pulled out all the time. And I'm a Leo, so that doesn't fly when you have like FOMO all the time that you're leaving your classroom. So I was a pull-out kid and I hated it. But I didn't know there was an alternative for me. And so when I think back as a student, I would call it just leave me alone education. I just want to stay in my class with my friends. And then I just like school just was never really a place where I felt, if you think about, what inclusion means, words that come to mind, belonging and community and safety and really like I never felt those things in school. But again, I didn't know that that was called something. And then I had a really pivotal year when I was in grade 8 because in grade 7 I got expelled for behavior. And so I go to this new school and all of a sudden, I start to feel these feelings of belonging and acceptance. And this school was a pretty significant school at the time. It was innovative. It was the first middle school in Alberta. And there was plenty of junior highs. But what middle school is and how it's supposed to be is different, is that it's designed around middle school pedagogy, not a small high school for younger kids. And so this middle school was intentionally a brand new school built according to middle school pedagogy. So community and belonging were central to the entire creation of the school, which was also where Leighton Schneller taught me. So that's how him and I started to be connected. It was when I was 12. And so, it makes sense that I still have connections to people during that time in my life because that's when I got the glimpse of what school could be. And it was the first time that there were kids with disabilities other than my own. In classrooms, there was no special education wing. We were in classrooms that were grouped in pods of 4, and we had access to special educators and educational assistants in a way that I never experienced before, and it changed my life, that school. I was there for 2 years, and it kinda gave me a glimpse of what's possible, and so when I went into education, I went in U of A, I'm like, "I'm gonna be a special educator, and I want my grade 8 year to be in every school," right? But I learned that how rare that school was, and I mean, and even, like, historically, that school only lasted 2 years before it was turned into a junior high. Because no one could handle it. They couldn't handle the change. Parents couldn't handle the change. Other schools couldn't handle the change. The principal was pushed out. Like, change freaks people out,
It
you
does.
know? And, it was mixed grades. Like, it was so
Mhm.
innovative and so ahead of its time, and I'm so lucky that I got access to it. It was also Apple's first technology site in Canada. So it was the first time I had access to technology, which was a game changer for me. So I see that it was almost as serendipitous because I could see what's possible, and it's very hard to dream when you
Mhm.
don't know what's possible. So that became the goal was how do we make schools like this? It's been a now what 30-year journey of trying to figure this out, um, and also realizing how hard it is not just to change, but also what that school had going for it that other schools don't is it was brand new. It didn't have to deal with history. It didn't have to deal with that. That's not how we do things. It doesn't have to deal with it. This is how we've always done it. It didn't have to deal with those things. It got to handpicked educators. And so you realize that there's some very real barriers out there for this work that are based in legacy that is 100 years old. And so changing that is a monster and it's going to take forever. But, once you see something, you can't unsee it. And so when I started to become then a special educator, my first job was in New York, and I was really excited because I was placed in an elementary school and I was a co-teacher, and I'm like, "Oh, this is inclusive. This is really great." And I get to my classroom, and I mean, the ratio was high, but it was like half kids who were like designated and half kids weren't. So it's a high ratio, but still, it's better. But then I'm like, I have nobody with autism in my class. You know, like, I'm in New York City, like, the population's big enough for me to have someone with autism in my class. And when I looked at my students, it still was very much like students that have disabilities, but they were not significant or complex at all. And so when I, pushed a little harder and I'm like, where are the kids with Down syndrome? Where are the kids with intellectual disabilities? And very kind, well meaning people are like, oh no, they don't go to this school.
Hmm.
And I'm like, but this is an inclusive, like, we're coded an inclusive school. And they're like, yeah, we're inclusive to the kids who are here. And I'm like, that's not what that means to me, right? But like when you're a brand new teacher, and you're surrounded by people who are lovely, well-meaning people, and they're telling you something different, you think you're the one that's off. And I realize that this has now followed me through my entire trajectory of people around me who are lovely and well-meaning, who are telling me I'm wrong. But then at the end of the day, I keep thinking to myself, I don't think I'm wrong. You know what I
Not
mean?
wrong.
That's not what inclusion means. Like,
No.
inclusion means everyone. And then you find out in New York City and in many places, kids with the most significant needs are sent somewhere else, in this case, a different district.
Wow.
So there's a
different school.
cutoff for their inclusion.
Inclusion works for those who it works for.
Yeah.
In no research article will you find that definition. And so then you realize, and I've realized now over this journey that like I make people really mad because at the end of the day, I refuse to say that that's the definition, that inclusion is for those who it works for. And now that I can say I've gone through this whole research journey of really trying to figure this out and being like, that's not what inclusion means. And it doesn't mean that there isn't real barriers in the way. There absolutely are. We can't just blame everything on funding. You know what I mean? Like, there are real reasons here that we have to address, because if you're looking for a reason why it can't work, there will always be one. And I really believe that, and I've seen it.
Yeah.
And we need people like you, right? To say, no, wait a minute. This isn't what inclusion looks like.
It's not. It's not. But I also understand, and I'm more strategic about this now, is that it's very hard for people to trust something that they haven't ever seen and they didn't experience and they weren't taught how to do. And then you add on to that the stress factors of not having enough funding and not having enough time. And this is what I didn't understand in my younger teacher days, when I was less strategic to say it looks like a lot of pushback, but the scapegoats become the students. It doesn't mean those issues aren't real, but it's taking that step back to say, like, what are we advocating for here, right?
Now you have a P framework for inclusive education. Can you tell us what the 5 Ps are and how we put them in practice?
Someone told me once, you guys, that I'll put all this time and effort into this dissertation that no one will read, and I am so happy to talk to you about my dissertation
Perfect.
because it took a lot of work. And so I would love to talk about it because it's like blood, sweat, and tears went into that document.
Exactly.
So part of my dissertation was doing a literature review, because my specific area of research was looking at secondary schools and including students with intellectual disabilities in academic classrooms, because those are the students who are the least included around the world,
Mm.
including British Columbia. So I was like, well, what do we know? What do we know those classrooms need? And so I had to find at least 20 research studies from the last 10 years of students who have intellectual disabilities who are included in academic secondary classrooms. And I found 21. There wasn't a lot. Like, it was a no-go. So I was able to find them. And so then the framework of my study then became like, well, what happened in these studies? What were the themes that allowed this work to happen? Which is where the 5 Ps emerged. And I just want to point out, this is before ChatGPT. Like, I had to do real brain work to find these themes.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's a great disclaimer to put out there, right?
Like,
Came from your brain.
this is from my brain. And so these were the five Ps. And it was actually like in the original, when I did the original kind of like synthesis, it was like the 5 Ps were additive. So P1 plus P2 plus P3 plus P4 plus P5 equals P1. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you what the Ps are, but I want you to think about P1 because it almost becomes a cycle.
Okay.
You ready? Now, the first P, it is the easiest and the hardest. It's the easiest because it's free. It requires 0 resources to do this. You ready?
Yes.
And it is having a positive mindset. And you have to have a positive mindset in 2 ways. The first way is you have to have a positive mindset of inclusion, like that inclusion is possible, that inclusion is the right thing to do, and that our decisions have to be made on how more inclusive can we be. Okay? But it also connects to the positive attitude towards students and how we presume competence in the ability of all of our students. And I've never actually met someone who said to me, I don't believe that all kids can learn. But what ends up happening is decisions are based on assumptions that all students that can't learn. And this is why we have life skills programs. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are decisions that have been made along the way based on assumptions of incompetence. And we don't see them as that. But if you look historically, that's where they come from. And so this one's super uncomfortable because people love life skills programs and they love coffee carts. But if you look at where those historically come from, you realize that so many of the decisions we make are anchored in incompetence, not competence. So that's the first one. Positive mindset towards students and towards inclusion. Now that's the first one because it makes the difference from all the P's after it. Okay? Because mindset is important, but it's also not enough. You can't just believe and it'll appear.
Yes.
Now we have to make decisions. Okay? So the
True.
first decision we have to make is we actually have to place students in inclusive classrooms in schools. Now, as a huge prop to British Columbia is, and I say this from a worldwide perspective, is the most infrastructurally intentional, I'm trying to make up words, intentionally disrupting the infrastructural conditions of place because 50 years ago, it closed down separate schools. Special schools for students. There are less than a handful left in this province. Now, that doesn't say there isn't programs, but specific schools for students with intellectual disabilities are very few and far between in British Columbia, and that's amazing. The next step, though, is that similar disruption at the school level to say, okay, our students actually now, they're placed in the school, but they're not actually placed in classrooms, especially as students get older. So in my study, I had 5 academic classrooms that were my case study with 7 students, and more than half of those I had to manufacture because they didn't exist. Okay, like kids were not in academic classrooms. They were in electives, sometimes phys ed, but they were not in academic classrooms. So then you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? It comes from the first P. And well-meaning people will say, well, they're not going to get anything out of it. Won't their time be used more meaningfully somewhere else? And like well-meaning people believe that. And that's where that's hard because I understand that it's well-meaning. I get it. It just doesn't align with research. It aligns with reaction and opinion. So we have positive attitudes. Students are actually placed in inclusive classrooms and schools. The third one is one that was a big question for me because I spent 7 years in a high school in British Columbia, and we went through the first one, and it was a hard fought battle to get all kids in classrooms. But then once they were there, they were just there, right? They were on the side with an EA. And so the third one is the role of peers and looking at our students with disabilities within proximity to and participating with students with and without disabilities. And then that automatically brings in the role of educational assistants and knowing that we absolutely need them, but what they do is more important than them just being there because often they become an unintended barrier.
I've seen that.
You've
Yeah.
seen it. You've
Yeah,
seen
you
it.
see that at every school, right?
All the schools. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's the number one requested resource.
it is.
And it's the least backed by research. And it doesn't mean we don't need them,
We do need them.
but we need them. We need to talk about how they're used more than just advocating for the numbers of how many we have. Yeah, you guys know, you know.
No, but that's such a great
Mhm.
thing for people to hear, right? Like we're not saying we don't need that support.
No.
We definitely need that support, but what does that support look like?
Yeah. And I have this conversation with parents all the time because they're also told to advocate for a one-on-one. And I'm like, never advocate for a one-on-one. That's actually going to decrease the feeling of belonging and safety and community that we're actually advocating for and where the benefits of inclusion are. And so instead, advocate for a support staff for the class. Advocate for collaboration time for your teacher. Advocate, you know what I mean? Like there's things you can advocate for that involve people. But without the articulation of what they're doing, we lose.
That makes so much sense.
You know, this is why people get mad at me.
No, but it makes sense. It goes back to how you started, that inclusion means everyone.
It needs everyone, right? Including our EAs who aren't feeling very included either, right? Like, okay, number 4 is my new research, which is purpose. And this really gets on okay, they're there, they're hanging with their peers, but why are they actually there? What are they actually learning? And this is my new research because this then uncovers the can of worm of individual education plans and talking about if we talk about one process that takes so much resources to do that has the least impact, it's individual education plans. Like they're done for auditors. They're not done for children. And so if we're going to talk about something that takes a lot of resources that aren't useful to teachers, And so this is the original intent of the competency-based, inclusive and competency-based IEP, which is another huge props to British Columbia, but has kind of taken a rollout turn for sure. It's lost kind of that initial spirit. And it's kind of become a change in template rather than a change in process, which then scapegoats the IEP. Again, instead of taking that zoom out and just being like, why do we need a new IEP? Because IEPs are not useful to teachers and they're not useful to students. And so the new research is how, if we're going to have individual education plans, which I actually really believe in, how are they purposeful to a student and to a teacher and to a community where that student is being included? And so it's very, very anchored in Indigenous pedagogy. And that idea of to be included means you are responsible to a place and a place is responsible to you. And it's that symbiotic relationship of responsibility that cannot be simplified down to a template
Yeah, and I think
that's
people,
checked off by
really.
an auditor, you know?
Yeah. Do you think it's the accountability piece that people really hang on to an IEP for not the right reasons?
It's funny though, because like we have very low accountability in British Columbia compared to other places in the world. I mean, anytime you tell anyone that they have to do something, there's going to be pushback, right? And I get that part. I think the part that's extra tricky in BC is because we have a more traditional IEP framework, and then we have the inclusive and competency-based framework, and they're two completely different. Have I told you the metaphor of the seed packet?
No, share that.
So this is my vision for IEPs. You ready? So a little seed needs to grow in a garden. Okay, so biodiversity, we need a diverse garden. The gardener may not have expertise for every single plant in its garden, and that's okay, right? So we actually need a way to support the gardener, not the seed. So what information can a seed give to a gardener? A seed packet. So a seed packet, you look at it, it's got a beautiful picture of the plant, right?
Huh?
If you look at them, it's got a vision statement about how great they are and how lucky you are to have one. Like I looked at one, it was like the Roma tomato,
Yeah.
and it's like, you're so lucky. Roma tomatoes are heirloom plants and they're great for sauce. They have thick skin. Like it's just this like strength-based vision statement. And then you turn it over and it's directions for the gardener. Like, this is what you need to do to help this plant grow. Nowhere on that seed packet does it say these are the things you need to do to make it a cucumber, right? Like it is a total
You know
celebration
what?
of the
That is
aroma.
such a great
That's
analogy.
exactly like IEPs need to be for teachers, not for students, because they don't need to change, they need to grow. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with a Roma tomato, just like there's nothing wrong with Down syndrome. And it's okay if you don't know what to do, but the goal is not to take away disability. And as soon as we realize this work will get so much easier, so much easier. So then the fifth P, this is my favorite P. You ready? Planning for everyone. Now it sounds simple, but this is not what we were taught. We were taught plan for the kids who should be there and then adapt and modify for all the kids who shouldn't be there.
You're right.
And that is the most inefficient, resource sucking process I have ever experienced in my entire life. Like, no wonder people only want 3 kids with disabilities in their class because that's so much work. It is so much work. I get it. But that's also like, there's another way. There's another way that's so much easier. We're like, how about instead of teaching to who should be there, you teach to who's actually there? And what if we teach to the range instead of teaching to the average? And what if we start with universal supports for everyone and add on? Like, there's so many other ways to do that, but we've put so much of our advocacy into eliminating the diversity instead of actually learning how to manage it.
It's such a mind for certain people, not for everybody, because there's so many educators who are wonderful and are doing that. But for those that are struggling, it's such a shift in mindset for them that it's hard for them to get around that, right?
Well, and I go back to if they've never seen it, they don't know what it looks like, and they were taught the inefficient model.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Of course, it makes sense to advocate for homogeneity because that's how schools are designed. And that's how we were taught to teach, especially as kids get older. Look how stressed everyone was when we de-streamed English language arts. You know what I mean? But like, if you look at the research around why that happened, there is no other option when you realize how inequitable streams are, right? There's no other option. And so it's like understanding the why, but like the reaction comes from fear of having no idea what to do. And that's okay. That's okay. It's okay to have fear. It's okay to say, you know what, Shelley? Yes, okay, I get it, but I have no idea how to make this Science 10 classroom accessible for everybody in a way that I don't have to stay here 24 hours a day. I'm like, I can work with that. What I can't work with is that kid can't come to my class because I already have 3 kids with disabilities in here. That's a huge problem. That's a huge problem.
So, on that note,
Yeah.
we've heard you say that we need to stop training students to be 50s housewives.
That's my favorite quote.
This had both of us reflect on some of the jobs our schools have
Mhm.
assigned to our neurodiverse learners. Can you share examples from schools that have evolved to
Yeah.
create rich learning experiences that recognize the strengths of each student? And, this would help those teachers or
Mhm.
educators who say, I can't have more than 3 neurodiverse students in my class. Like,
Right.
I'm maxed out.
I just think, first of all, quotas are a huge problem for any identity. Like, Ontario used to have quotas for Indigenous students. Can you imagine the outrage, right? Like, we have to understand that disability is an equal identity in the law to all identities, right? And so understanding that how we create conditions for diversity has to include disability in the same way that we consider other identities, okay? So, what some innovative jurisdictions, and sometimes it's legislated, especially in the States, is they'll have like actual proportionate data. So, like if your classroom or your program or your school doesn't reflect the proportions of the community that you serve, that disproportionality is actually like a red flag. Right. And so we do it a little bit in terms like our big four indicators are we look at Indigenous students, we look at English language learning students, we look at students who are designated, and we're starting to look at mental health. But when you actually disaggregate that data, we're very, very disproportionate, especially as students get older. And if there was one thing that I would wish for BC, it's more data. Because we really don't have a lot of data. And so it's really hard to make decisions based on data. And instead we're making decisions based on reactions and opinions, which we start to get into really unsafe territory. Looking first of all at, okay, do your programs and do your classrooms reflect the proportion of the community that you're in? Right. There was one school I was visiting in California, and they were very, very excited about sharing. I was touring with Katie Novak, sharing their exemplar classrooms of co-teaching. And we walk in, and every student in that class was of color. And we're like, okay, that we're noting that. And we're like,
Yeah.
what are the proportionality statistics of this community? And it was 60% students who are racialized. And so you start to see, like, if your co-taught classrooms are 100% racialized, but you're in a community that's 60% racialized, that's an equity issue,
Mhm.
Hmm.
right? And so, looking at, especially as kids get older, your programs, like, okay, you have a mini school in the back, you have a life skills program in the basement, you have all of these programs.
Hmm.
How do they reflect the community you're serving? Who's
Mhm.
there and who's not there? And I think that's a really, really big question because there's a lot of great programs like outdoor education programs and even faith-based programs. Like, it's not that we don't have programs, but if we want them to be equitable, they have to actually reflect the community. And if it were up to me, if they didn't reflect the community, they don't get public funding, right? Like, actually looking at schools to say, are you reflecting the community that you're in? And if you're not, you don't get public funding from that community. Like, if it were up to me, guys, but it's not. So I would say, as a leader, that would be the first thing I would do. I would say, let's look at our school population. Let's look at our community population. Let's look at our subgroups. Let's look at our programs. How are they reflective?
Hmm.
Right? Other really, really innovative things are focus groups with students. Find out what students think about what's going on. Part of my research was interviewing students. And it was really interesting because I made sure that in my research, I spoke with students with intellectual disabilities, but also students that had disabilities that weren't intellectual. And students with intellectual disabilities actually said they felt very included. The students that felt the least included were students with invisible disabilities, right? And so it's thinking about, you would never even know that unless you actually talk to students. And so there's some great work, even here in British Columbia, being like part of the data that we're collecting, how much of that is coming from actual different subgroups of your community and making sure that those voices are being heard and that decisions are being made based on those voices. Because it's one thing to have a consultant come in and say, oh yeah, no, you need to be more inclusive. But it's another thing when you talk to a student and one of the students said to me, how am I supposed to feel included when I'm in the basement? Like, that's way more powerful coming from a student than it is coming from a person who's going to walk in for an afternoon and do a PD session and tell a few jokes, right? Like, actually doing the work to say, who are the kids? Where are their voices? Where are the families' voices? All of these things are important. When I worked with students, I think the thing that's really hard, because I really believe that people are well-meaning and their hearts are in the right place, especially when it comes to like the skills, right? But the kids love it. They love the coffee cart. They love delivering popcorn. They love recycling, and that pulls on people because they don't like math. So this is a better use of their time. And I'm like, well, okay, but would you say that for any other identity group? If they're like, well, if they like the coffee cart better, well, not only are teachers seeing that, but all the other peers are seeing that. And we're not breaking that competency cycle of, oh, they have to do that better instead of math. They must not be capable of math, right? So if you have kids who love the coffee cart, have a coffee cart club at lunchtime, after school, and open it up to the whole
Where everyone's
community,
welcome.
right? Like when you pigeonhole this group of students during instructional time to say they're doing that because that's what they can do,
Yeah.
we will never disrupt that cycle of that's all that they can do. And oh my goodness, that's not all they can do. They've never had the conditions that actually create opportunities for them to do more.
Okay, now I love how whenever I turn on your Instagram and I see these clips, you are so often talking through metaphors. And the other day I sent you a message because it was just like this aha moment when you were talking about all this extra work teachers put on themselves and how we need to change how we're teaching and how we're
Mhm.
assessing. But you used Google Maps
I sure
as
did.
your analogy, and it was so brilliant. And it just gave me the tools to support new teachers, especially. And I'm wondering if you can share that analogy with us because it just makes sense.
I'm going to do an even better
Okay.
version because Google Maps is actually two metaphors in one. Okay. So to zoom out a little bit, and we're talking about P number 5, everyone. Planning for all. Planning for all requires two sides of a balance. Okay. On one side is the curriculum. Okay. What are the goals? On the other side are what are the supports that students need to meet the goals? So we have goals on one side and supports on the other side. And these get very, very mixed up and misunderstood when we start to say things like adaptations. Okay, so we're going to remove that language because assessment is of goals. Supports don't affect assessment, or they shouldn't. So these are two separate parts of the equation. Okay, so we're going to start off with the one that you heard, which is a curricular design framework that increases accessibility without sacrificing challenge is a framework we all know and love, which is backwards design. Okay. Now, backwards design is actually not an inclusive framework. It was a framework designed to support gifted learners because it actually increases depth of understanding. The idea is if we know our goal and we can have students show how they get there in different ways, that's going to increase their depth of understanding. Now, where it gets confusing is that none of us grew up in a backwards design frame. We grew up in a forwards design frame where it wasn't the goal that was the destination, it was the task that was the destination, right? Everyone has to read The Outsiders. And then add on to that UDL, which is how do you differentiate the different pathways to get there? People are still wrapped up in the I'm trying to UDL The Outsiders. We're trying to universally design the task. You can't UDL a task. That's the whole point. UDL goes with backwards design, which is actually putting in options for the routes to get. So then the Google Maps metaphor is backwards design is putting in your destination. That's the goal. Where do you want to go? Right? And sometimes instantaneously, Google Maps will be responsive to barriers and
Yes.
offer different routes to get there to the same destination. Now, you could be coming from many different places. You know, I could be coming from Bowen Island. You guys are coming from Surrey. Someone could be coming from Richmond. But if your goal is to get to one destination, the goal, no one's going to take the same route. And so if you add on to that, there's different routes to get there, but also the responsivity of there's an accident, there's a barrier. We have to find another way. That right there is backwards design in UDL, right? What's the goal? And UDL is there's a barrier. How are we finding a new route to get there? Okay. Now, the other beautiful part about backwards design, it also is a metaphor for supports. You ready?
Yeah.
So instead of adaptations and modifications, we're moving to like a multi-layered model. Okay. So rather than saying you get this and you get this and you get this, that's all a retrofitting process. We're trying to say, what can we do for everyone to reduce barriers? Okay. So if you think about Google Maps, the one tool that everyone has access to on any GPS device is what? What support does every single GPS device, even the original TomTom, what does it use?
Well, I guess it's like visual.
It's a visual. Yes, it's a visual map.
Yeah, and it's auditory too, right? So
But hold
can-
on, Sandeep. Hold on. Put it
Not
in your
talking.
pocket.
I feel so smart.
No, it is. That's it. Every GPS device has a map.
Mhm.
If it doesn't have a map, it's not a GPS device.
Yeah.
It is universally useful. Okay. But as Sandeep also pointed out, that's not the only thing. It also has what?
Auditory.
Auditory, but I'm gonna tell you, I hate it. It interrupts my podcasts. I always put it on Irish Paul. I hate Irish Paul because I'm like, Irish Paul, I don't need your help right now. And so Irish Paul is not universal. Irish Paul is targeted. And what that means is it's still available to anyone, but the actual person gets to decide if it's useful for them or not. Okay. So that's like, what are things we can do for everyone that are useful for everyone? What are things we can do that we can still teach to everyone that everyone has access to, but it's actually the students that decide if that's useful to them? And then it does something even more amazing. You know what else Google Maps do?
What?
It takes your exact location and makes you a route to another exact location that's not useful to anyone else but you. Okay, it's individualized. Everyone also has access to that if they need it, but they build on each other. Having an individualized route without a map is not useful, right? It's not impactful. And so thinking about Google Maps both as it gives you alternate routes, but it also provides different levels of support. Everyone has access to Google Maps. Google Maps is the same for everyone, but how it's used is so individualized. And that's why people love it, because people can decide what parts of it they can use. Everybody uses. Did you know that you can also print out the steps if you still want to like have a navigator? Like it has all of these additional options, but everyone still has access to them.
Do you know my favorite part of Google Maps?
Tell me.
And it's probably that voice part. It's where it gives you the message that says, like, there is police on scene. Are they still there? And you get to hit yes. And then I feel like I'm part of Google Maps. I love that.
And you've become a Google Maps advocate, right? You've actually now brought the community in to support each other, because people driving the road who have the lived experience of that road are more valuable than the satellite so far away, than the person in Silicon Valley who's doing the coding. And so they were so smart to include that, because they were just like, how do we actually now get data from people on the ground that we can be responsive to? And so that's where that student voice comes in, right? The other thing I love is that you can now pick the color of your car.
Oh, yeah, you can.
It's the ultimate metaphor, right? Nowhere there are we adapting or modifying. We're actually handing over agency to students to start to have some control, which is what the entire BC curriculum is based on.
In talking about the planning for everyone, when you're speaking about supports, your work advocates to remove the shame associated with supports, right? I love the metaphors you use. You've used a metaphor of winter tires. Can you explain how a shift in thinking can disrupt negative beliefs and help us realize that everyone needs supports?
You know, it took me a while to realize this, but I was curious, like, why are people so like freaked out about this? And if you ask people, it's because they're like, well, because it compromises evaluation. That's what they'll say, right? Like if they use that support, it changes the evaluation, but that's because we're still thinking in a forwards design model. So if the goal, if the destination is to read The Outsiders and you have a book on tape, then yeah, that compromises the complexity of the assignment, right? But what's the goal? The goal is actually character development and inferencing, you know, like then you realize that those supports actually don't compromise that evaluation. And so that's why, like, in a forwards design model, which is how all we were taught and most of us were taught to teach, adaptations do compromise evaluation, which is why people don't let kids have them. So it's helping people to realize we're not in that model anymore. We're not in a forwards design model. If there's any place on the planet that we are allowed to give people access to resources around supports and strategies, it's British Columbia, right? But to understand that we have to let go of the forwards design model, because if the destination is the activity, then those adaptations do compromise evaluation. But in a backwards design model, in one that uses UDL, it's the balance of using them and the agency of students using them. It's like saying you're going to evaluate me poorly because I wear glasses. Like in a UDL model, the goal is not to not have glasses, right? The goal is to see, you know, but I could see like in a forwards design model, the goal is normalizing. No, you have to not wear glasses, right? You have to see without glasses, because for a long time, glasses were stigmatized. That's why contact lenses were created.
And it's interesting you say that. I feel old sharing this example, but my first year teaching in 99, we had a cheer team. We had this cheerleading team at Terry Fox that I helped sponsor. I had no idea what it was doing, but I helped sponsor. And they were in a competition and they did really well. They killed it. And then they didn't place and they got their scorecard, and it was because they took off points because some of the students were wearing glasses.
That is a perfect example. The destination was the look.
Mm-hmm.
That was the goal for them. And that's, you see how inequitable that is?
Yeah. And the kids were outraged and went to the media and helped change the policy, but they had a crazy policy.
The ultimate example.
It
Exactly.
doesn't make a lot of sense, but
What's the actual goal here? And that's, I think, what often people get stuck in. Like, the goal here, people think, "Oh, well, these are these activities that I have planned for this year." But we haven't actually met the kids yet, right? And it's like this cheer competition.
Mhm,
It didn't matter who the kids were,
exactly.
because they had this legacy of, "This is what you should be able to do." That's not based in research. That's not based in that's a perfect example of forwards design.
Now, you just talked about the beginning of the school year, and you also mentioned that for some reason you are not in charge of like everything education and every decision. And with so much of what you're saying, we wish you were. And so we have a question for you. If every educator listening was able to implement one change for this school year, what would you like them to do?
If you know your learning standards at a lesson level, you can be inclusive, because then you're forcing yourself to say, "Why am I doing this?" And if there is a traffic jam, is there another route? But if you don't know your learning standard, you can't do that. You're going to sit in traffic. All the kids are going to be sitting in traffic. And you know what happens when people sit in traffic? Road rage.
They get a little grouchy.
And that's what happens with kids. They get classroom rage because they're sitting there waiting for EAs that don't exist to come help them. Like, you have to know the learning standards. And even more importantly, and there's research to back this, students need to know the learning standards.
Yeah, they have to
They
know
need
Yeah,
their
to
you
know,
know why they're
destination.
there. What are
why
they
am I
doing?
here? Where am I going? Because sometimes they have really good alternate routes to get there.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But if they
It's
don't, if
so
they
true.
think that their job is to drive down Granville Street and they can't, and they're getting in trouble because they can't drive down Granville Street, then they're going to throw a chair really accurately. So we have to like take a step back and be like, what are we doing? So
Yeah.
that's number one. Know your learning standards. Help your students know the learning standards. One of my favorite lessons to do with students, and I have done this with 5-year-olds and 17-year-olds, is to take the curricular learning standard and work with students to turn it into student-friendly language. And pull out words you don't know, and there you have your unit made. What are the
Well, and
learning
then you're
standards?
increasing your understanding so
Yeah.
much, right? Well,
What are the vocabulary? Why are we doing this? And if you're listening to this and you're a parent and you get sent home homework and your kid's having a hard time, the best question you can ask is, what's the learning standard?
mm,
Because this way's not working. Is there another way my child can show this information? Is there
amazing.
another way? It's honestly backwards design if that's the only thing we did. Education would blow up for both teachers and students.
Mhm.
But I think it's realizing, I think a lot of people think forwards design is backwards design. And I did. I did. I didn't even realize there was a forwards design. And so when I understood the difference, that's when I was like, okay, this is where inclusion lives.
Now we have one question that we always love to close with, and I feel like it's perfectly timed because I'm feeling responsible that we kinda got you wound up. And now we're going to bring you right back down because our final question that we always close with is around well-being. And it's a personal question, though. We would love to know for you, what do you do to support your well-being? I know you're flying all over the world. You're a mom, you're a busy educator. What's one tip that you do every day or as much as you can to
Yeah.
support your own well-being?
Man, that's such a good question. I love a good nap.
Do you still get naps now that you're a
It's
mom?
very rare. Parenting is so hard. I love catching a good sunset. I think something really practical is like, I love these conversations. I love presenting. I love helping schools to move. Like, I love this work so much, but it's also knowing that it's okay to like also just spend the evening in the hotel watching Home and Garden television and getting DoorDash. Do you know what I mean? Like, not like allowing myself room to have some downtime, because it's easy to feel guilty about that when everyone's like, "Let's go for dinner," and I'm like, "I just need my pajamas," and to kinda, know that, like, maybe I just wanna drive my own car, and so just knowing the balance between the, like, being on the stage, Shelley, and also being the, like, because sometimes I think I'm, like, an extroverted introvert,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
I forget that I also need some introverted time, and so just that, like, "You know what? We're not gonna have guests this weekend. Just gonna hang with my fam." And it's taken me a long time to realize that I do need I do need that downtime, and so even though it's so hard to be a parent and my kids are all over the place and we're renovating and there's just natural stresses of daily life, like, just being able to be, I think is very, cup filling for me.
Thank you.
I love that. It's such a good advice, and I can completely relate. I bought that book Quiet because I just wanted to do the
Yeah, yeah.
Google. I
Yeah.
just wanted to know, am I an introvert or extrovert? And then I got 50% right in the middle. I'm like, "That's not helping. Give me an answer."
We need
Right?
both, and we need
Exactly.
both. We need both, you
We
know?
need both. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy, busy schedule. We
You,
are
like
so appreciative,
you, like,
and
solved the world's problems in that
you I
podcast.
think you did just
Yeah.
solve the world's problems.
And I think, like, for me, the really big takeaway I took from this was, like, how do programs in schools reflect the community you are serving? You know, like,
Mm,
what kind of citizens do we want,
Mm, mhm,
regardless of
mhm,
what their abilities are,
mhm.
right? Like, how are we serving our community and how are we helping our learners do that?
Who's who's missing? That was my
mm,
favorite quote I'll leave you with. Inclusion is serving who's there. Equity is asking who's missing.
Thank you for that.
You guys, I
love it.
love you. I love the
Love
work
it.
you're doing. Keep going. Keep
Thank
going.
you.
Okay.
Thank you,
J-
Shelley Moore.
Thank you, Shelley.